similar to Cosmos, and they're leading to improved performance, user experiences, lower fees for users, all that good stuff. And they're also partnering up with Marble Wallet, which I find pretty cool, which offers seamless onboarding experiences for users like fiat on ramps and all that stuff, and some pretty cool built UI components for devs. So expect in this conversation a pretty big deep dive into their platform and discussing advantages on things like app rollups. Very similar to what Saga is offering, Saga XYZ. And we're going to go over Caldera's unique solution for things like scalability, usability in the crypto industry. So without further ado, I want to welcome Mr. Katz. Mr. Katz, thank you so much for joining us, brother. How are you feeling today, my man? And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk shop with us, man. God bless you and welcome to the Because Bitcoin community, man. How are you feeling?
Hey, feeling great, and thanks so much, Wabi, for the invite. Super excited to speak with everyone today. I'm Matt. I'm the co-founder of Caldera. Wabi gave a very, very great intro on what we're building, so I don't want to rehash the same words. But effectively, what we're working on is giving teams the ability to launch app chains as rollups on top of Ethereum. So kind of bringing, as Wabi said, that Cosmos thesis of app chains for better UX, for better scalability, for having unique functionality on chains. But at the end of the day, bringing that model into Ethereum and other EVM compatible L1s and helping them grow their app chain ecosystem. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure there's some questions, but yeah, great to be here.
Awesome, man. It's glad to have you here, man. You guys have an excellent team. I know you guys, had some pretty good engineering interns and all that stuff. I know one of your guys used to work at Coinbase. It seems to escape my name right now, but I find the team pretty cool. You guys have an awesome background. So, for the individuals in the audience, in case you're not able to stick around the space for the entirety of our time here with Mr. Katz. You can catch it up on our YouTube. Same thing as the name of our Twitter profile, Because Bitcoin. And you can catch all of our previous spaces there under the live section in Crypto World Radio playlist. So I guess we can start off right now, man. So, man, I find it pretty impressive how Caldera is tackling two of the biggest challenges facing the crypto space right now, right? So we have scalability and usability, right? With its app rollups platform. Katz, can you share with us some of the key features that make app rollups in specific stand out from other L2 solutions that are currently available for users in the crypto industry? And what I mean by that is through that, how does Caldera plan to maintain its competitive edge within the industry at the moment, man? It seems that you guys are just shipping out left and right, and I believe you guys are about like 15 months old, if I'm not mistaken. About 15 months or so, give or take.
Yeah, I think more like 13. I think this is like a very, very interesting question to tackle. So I'll kind of come at it two ways. So I would say in like Ethereum L2 space, there are really two things that are built. There are Starknet, ZK Sync, all of these really great solutions. And then there are like application-specific L2s. And I think a lot of the early use cases of these have been what StarkX has done with Starkware. So things like DYDX was built on an app-specific L2, Sorare was built on an app-specific L2, et cetera. So you have these like two paradigms. And really, our kind of philosophy is that these are not necessarily competitive paradigms. There's just some applications which are well suited for being built on a general purpose L2, and there are some applications that need application-specific functionality. And what that might mean, it can mean many things. If you're working on, let's say, a game, maybe you need absolutely, as cheap transaction costs as possible because you're trying to reach as wide of an audience as possible. Maybe you don't want to post all the data on the chain to Ethereum. You want to use some sort of alternative data availability provider, whether that's EigenLayer or Celestia, or you want to roll your own solution to that. Maybe you need specific functionality which isn't currently in the EVM, but is necessary for your app. So, and thanks for sharing our tweet above. we recently launched stateful precompiles, which is basically a way for developers to make modifications below the EVM and add functionality that would be very, very hard to do if you're just, only able to write in Solidity. And this is like the power that you get when you're launching your own chain. At the same time, there are tons of applications where, if you just want to launch an NFT collection or a meme coin, you probably care a lot more about being part of like a broader general purpose chain. We're not going after those folks. And I think in that case, a general purpose L2 like Arbitrum or Optimism makes a ton of sense. As you mentioned, I mean, you alluded to Saga, you alluded, there are other folks who are building similar things with us. You talked about maintaining our competitive edge. And I think that actually goes back to even like the tweet that you just shared. Like we are a very, very product focused team. We think about blockchains like products. We think about this almost, even from like sort of like a traditional SaaS background. We're building for developers. We're building, the best tools that we can possibly build. And a big part of how we view ourselves in the space and how we view our ability to gain a competitive edge is to continue to build features that developers want and even need in order to really like build what they're building and unlock really cool new design patterns. And so, that's currently what we plan to do. And yeah, the stateful precompiles tweet up above is one example of that, and probably the most involved example of that. But I would say right now we have probably the most extensible, the most customizable rollup solution for teams that are looking for to build app chains with no code. We allow people to change things like the gas limits, what token is used to pay for gas, where the chain is settling, where the chain is posting data, et cetera. And then of course, with these custom stateful precompiles, the sky is the limit. You could totally even write smart contracts in a totally different language if you wanted to even, port the Solana virtual machine rollup, theoretically possible with this as well. So, that or underlying philosophy building,
Hey
all the
Matt,
developers want.
you're bugging, man. You're bugging at the moment.
Oh,
You're cutting off
okay.
over the last like 10 seconds.
Okay.
Yes, still bugging, brother. Still bugging, brother. You were good. You were good like about 30 seconds ago, though. Grit, are you able to hear Matt at the moment? Are you able to hear him?
No, I cannot hear him, but I did, like you said, like up until 30 seconds ago, it was all good. And it started getting wobbly and glitching out. But yeah, I think while Matt sorts out his mic and audio, do you kind of want to talk about like what they're kind of building and how relates to like interchain interoperability?
Okay, hi. Is this good now? I just relogged, so I wasn't able to hear the question.
Yeah. I'm able to hear you perfectly, man. Mr. Producer, can you send him a co-host invite, please? Or should we make Grit co-host? What do you guys think would be better suited for connection purposes? Okay. All right. We'll start over again. Matt, you can continue on, brother. You were speaking about the competitive edge and how how things relate to things like Saga and other things of the like.
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, to summarize, I don't want to go too long on this question. I mean, first of all, we are not really hyper competitive with a lot of the companies I think that are existing in this space. I mean, the whole modular blockchain narrative and paradigm, it's so new, it's so nascent, and I think it's better for all of us to be, focused on educating the world about what's possible when you can build your own chain rather than trying to, PvP compete for market share. I mean, that being said, we view our solution and the thing that makes us unique is that we're very product focused. We think about blockchains like products. We're focused on building feature level improvements that developers can really use to like accelerate their timelines, build really cool new things. And as well, from an architecture perspective, I think us, Saga, Eclipse, a lot of the other folks who are in this industry, we're all taking different approaches when it comes to architecture. And for us, we are being built on the Optimism stack, the OP stack. What that allows us to do is it allows us to settle on any EVM compatible chain, which means that we can more tightly couple these layer 2 blockchains to an Ethereum or a Polygon or some other chain which has liquidity. But I'll leave it there, and we can move on to the next question.
No problem. I think Grit wanted to throw something at your way while you were adjusting your connection. So, Grit, I'm going to pass it on over to you, and want to make something. Want to say something real quick. Tendermint Timmy, I sent you an invite to speak. I'm not sure if you received it. I'll send it again for you, brother. Sent you an invite to speak, man. So, Grit, thank you, man, for participating in our panel. And Matt, some great discussions, and I'll follow you up on your previous statements right after Grit Colt gives his question that he had for you.
Yeah, my question just relates to, how do you kind of envision, like interchain interoperability? Because we're seeing almost a balkanization, with the multi-chain kind of future and very specific application chains. In order for that to get there, what needs to happen in terms of infrastructure in between the chains?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And this is actually one of the reasons why we chose to build on the OP stack. It means that, on the first order, we kind of get bridging with the L1 for free. So if you're a roll up and you're settling on Ethereum, it's really, really easy for people to bridge Ethereum-based assets, whether those are tokens, NFTs, ETH, etc., to and from the roll up. Obviously, that solves some problems. That doesn't solve all problems. And we're watching the interoperability space with a really, really close eye. Some of the people on this call might have seen, we recently announced a partnership with Hyperlane. Wabi mentioned our two testnets, one on Gorley, one on Polygon. We actually currently have a Hyperlane-based bridge to send tokens across those two different rollups without needing to interact with the layer one chain. So there are some really, interesting developments that we've been able to make so far. We expect, given the fact that there's going to be, we envision a world where there are going to be thousands of blockchains, each with their own applications. There is definitely going to, that's going to require an interoperability layer between all of those blockchains. And we're really, really excited by some of the developments that are happening in the space. Hyperlane is one of them. There are a ton of other folks who are working on interoperability, of course. And we'll kind of see how things shake out. I'm actually not sure if I'm at liberty to talk about some of the projects I'm most excited about because they're in stealth right now. But it's safe to say that there are a lot of very smart people working on these problems, and we're planning on partnering with folks who are dedicated. They spend all their time thinking about the interoperability problem and then offering that to the developers who are building on top of us.
Great. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? Great. You're able to hear me, brother? Okay. All right. I think he's done, man. So, Matt, I want to throw something your way, given the discussion that we're having here. One of the biggest barriers to entry for users in the crypto space has been the complexity of the deployment process, right? And it's really exciting to know that you guys at Caldera are focused mainly on making it easier for anyone to launch their own app roll up and start building, right? In this case, Optimism, right? You have Coinbase rolling out their L2 on OP called Base, which I find, pretty nice, man. And I'd like for you to walk us through as far as how that process works and what kind of support and resources you guys would be able to provide developers to help them get started. And through all that, how do you see this focus on simplifying the deployment process for devs contributing to the overall growth and adoption of the crypto industry? It's really exciting to know that you guys are looking to be more of a value add to the overall space as far as layer 2 solutions go, and not just like another chain that seeks to dilute the crypto market, right? Like, the previous business cycle, we had all these L1s trying to extract liquidity from Ethereum, and needless to say, that didn't really work out. And now we're finding with layer 2s, it's sort of this solution where we can become an all-in-one hub and grow value with one another instead of dilution.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, going kind of backwards off of that question. Yeah, we're very aligned with that idea. And I think a lot of application developers are aligned with that idea as well. We had, we saw in the last cycle, most of the people who were building chains, they weren't really application specific chains. There were people trying to build general purpose chains, which are like Ethereum killers or Solana killers or Polygon or AVAX killers, et cetera. For us, we're not really focused on enabling that use case. We think that a lot of the demand for new chains is going to come from application developers, and application developers who are focused on building their application, who would probably want to deploy, let's say, their game on top of Ethereum, but they, for whatever reason, whether it's gas costs or limited functionality on Ethereum, or the fact that bandwidth is limited, et cetera, like aren't able to. And that kind of goes into like how we're thinking about design of like our platform and our product. We are really focused on, at the base layer being a no-code solution for people to deploy their own chains. And I think that might be a little surprising to some folks, because at the end of the day, we're still targeting developers, people who want to build applications. But one of like the core things that we found was that there are kind of like two types of people who might consider themselves blockchain developers. There are people who want to build blockchains, right? They probably are experienced with like the Cosmos SDK or Polkadot parachains. They come from like a systems programming background, sort of like the same people who, in the Web 2 world would have worked on, databases or operating systems, that sort of thing. And then there's like this far larger category of blockchain application developers who are more operating at the smart contract layer. So they know how to write smart contracts. They know how to write web or mobile applications that interact with those smart contracts. What they don't know how to do is build like underlying blockchains that run those smart contracts. And the skills to do this are very, very, distinct and separate. There are very few people who I think are highly competent on at both. And so for us, we came into this with the idea to build, a platform to help people spin up chains in like a no-code way. So really, we want it to be as easy as like filling in the details you want and then clicking a button, and then adding on extensions that say, oh, I want to have this hash function callable from the EVM. I want to use this token for gas. I need a block explorer. I need a bridge, etc. And being able to do that all without needing to write a single line of code. So that's what we're working towards currently. And you mentioned support. Currently, we are, as that platform is in development, we're currently working with a few select partners and providing them the support to launch their own chains. And so there's a little bit more kind of manual involvement from us. We're a team of engineers. We love getting our hands dirty with this technology. So it's really, no skin off of our back. So currently how folks work with us is like, they come to us with a problem. They're like, I'm building this DEX or I'm building this game. We're kind of stuck. We've hit a brick wall, whether that's with regards to gas fees, whether that's with regards to certain functionality they need, whether that's, with regards to like how much throughput they need on the chain, how many transactions they're expecting to make, et cetera. And then we work with those teams and help them design a blockchain that makes sense for them, get our hands dirty a little bit, and then launch it. But eventually, and fairly shortly from now, likely this quarter or next, we're going to have a more public platform that allows people to permissionlessly launch their own chains.
Great, go on right ahead, brother.
Yeah, no, that's a super interesting point, and you kind of alluded to what I'm kind of looking for in this next question. But essentially, to people who are currently building on ETH or layer twos, why, or who should consider making their own chain? What's the kind of benefit to this route compared to the more traditional route that's common now? It's like building your own kind of chain has been like alluded to a lot previously, but I think like now we're kind of seeing more talk about application specific and or DeFi specific. So what are your kind of thoughts on the actual benefits for people to actually build on them?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, the rationale for building your own chain usually comes from like one of three kind of categories, which would be scale or performance, customization, and then a little bit of sort of like ecosystem building or value capture. And I can go into examples for each one. So like, performance, the two biggest things there are throughput, so how many transactions you can make, and also fees, price, how much it costs to make every transaction. And so a lot of the teams that we're currently working with, they're looking at building either games or like some other types of like consumery applications, things that are kind of going to be kind of sold to the mass market. And they're looking for a solution that where it would be able to, let's say, mint 1 million NFTs and not really break a sweat. And that's very, very difficult to do on any layer one chain. Another thing that I think a lot of folks who are building these types of applications, one of the things that they're very afraid of is the fact that gas fees on traditional L1s or general purpose chains are really, really unpredictable. And because you have potentially thousands of apps all competing for really scarce block space, what you can happen is, like, let's say you're a game and you're subsidizing gas fees for users, and paying for them via like meta transactions. Your costs might go up 10x in a single day because some other application on that chain got popular, or because someone else was doing a big NFT mint that congested the chain. And so there's both this kind of like performance aspect, and then also the ability to de-risk from those performance characteristics changing on the chain, kind of like through no fault of your own. So there's a big segment there. I would say, as I said, those are a lot of like games, consumery applications, that sort of thing. And then on the other side, there are just people who, for whatever reason, need additional functionality on the chain, or the ability to add additional functionality on the chain majorly unblocks them in what they want to build. I think these types of applications, there are a lot of crypto native protocols that are really blocked by the fact that the EVM doesn't support certain operations. Recently, we started working with a team. What they wanted is they needed BLS signature aggregation in order to verify a certain type of signature that the EVM natively doesn't support. And this has really nice properties for aggregating many signatures all up into one that can then be verified on chain. And so they were looking for something like this. They were actually, like, Ethereum has an open EIP for this feature that's been around since like 2018 that has really gone nowhere. They needed this functionality. They were tired of waiting for Ethereum to merge it, or maybe not merge it. And so they decided to launch their own chain. We merged it in for them, and then they were just able to go and run with it and build their protocol without being blocked by waiting for Ethereum core devs to make a change to the core code base. And then the last thing I'll mention is, like, there are definitely certain value capture or like ecosystem growth reasons why someone would want to launch their own chain. I think this is definitely true for like for DAOs, or for some other types of applications, even maybe like kind of meme tokens that want to have grow a community of developers who are all building on top of their stack. The nice thing about when you have your own chain, you can use your own token to pay for gas. That can improve UX. That can also drive more value and utility to a token. And if you're let's say a DAO like Nouns, or maybe one of these on-chain gaming DAOs, where you're expecting people to be building things on top of the DAO and really permissionlessly extending it, then it's really, really nice if you could internalize all of that on your own chain, and then drive revenue growth through making fees off of that chain, or driving token utility by enabling the token to be used to pay for gas on that chain. So those are kind of like the three categories that we're seeing, for reasons why, or motivations for why people would want to build their own chain. But really, it's very open-ended. I think a lot of people just like the ability, or just like the model of being able to have their own thing that they call theirs, that they have a little bit more control over, that still is tied in with the broader Web3 ecosystem. And so we view it as like a very pragmatic way for people to kind of like dip their toes in the water. They can make their chain, they can sort of dictate the features of their chain, how interoperable it is, how how similar it is, where it settles, et cetera, and kind of get to build something new from the ground up.
Good discussion, man. I actually brought a dev up here who might have a few interesting things to throw your way. Ethan, if you're able to hear me, brother, welcome up on the stage, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Wabi. Yeah, I do have a background in development, but I haven't devved much in the recent past year, as I've been taking over more of a business administrative administrative position. With Kingdomly, we help people create generative collections, generative NFT collections, and deploy them without needing to know how to code. We also have a rental protocol, and so some of the things you mentioned were really cool. And I have a couple questions. It looks, and you may have to bear with me. I haven't read a whole lot of your guys's threads or content, but I saw something about subsidizing gas fees, and you touched on it briefly earlier. But it seems like some of your rollups, like you can customize it to have like zero gas fees, and is that like subsidized like via like meta transactions like you said? I guess it's different than those. Like how does that work? Could you explain that briefly?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, typically the way that this would be done if you're doing it on like Polygon is you'll be doing it via meta transaction, which means that you kind of bake into your protocol the ability for some operator, right, like your company, to make transactions on behalf of users, mint things to their wallets, et cetera. And users will typically send transactions not to the main blockchain, but to your like relayer that you're using, in some meta transaction service. Which will then construct the transaction, send it to the smart contract that you've modified to support meta transactions. Then the smart contract will process it, mint the NFT, et cetera. What we're able to do, because it's your own blockchain, you get to control the node, is like you could actually avoid all of that by just setting gas fees to zero. And so then users will be able to make native transactions and just put zero gas fees. On MetaMask, it'll just show as a zero fee. And so this both, can help you, grow the number of users. It can increase user experience. It also means that, as a developer, you're saving some time in not needing to like bake in meta transactions to every contract that you build, right? You can just use a standard NFT mint contract and trust that users will be able to mint from it in a gas-free way. I mean, that being said, there are like some big considerations for this. Like it's like everything makes sense on the technical level. Then you need to suddenly think about like security and cost, right? Like, the blockchain itself is still incurring a little bit of cost to post data for these transactions onto the chain you're settling on, let's say Polygon. And so there is limited throughput on the chain, just like with like any server or web service. So then it actually becomes much more similar to like a Web 2 approach, where you need to think about like what happens if someone like spams the chain or DDoSes the chain, or just like submits a bunch of junk transactions. That'll increase your costs. That'll that can sort of crowd out legitimate usage on the chain. And then you might need to think about things like whitelisting, things like spam protection on the node itself. But from a technical perspective, it's totally doable. And like we've worked with teams, especially in the on-chain gaming space, to make this sort of functionality a reality. And like it totally works well, especially if you're a smaller app and you don't really need to care or think too much about like these like larger scale attacks that might be made.
That's really cool. Yeah, so it sounds like technically it's all sound and solid, but game theory wise, there's some more vulnerability to Sybil attacks and DDoS and stuff like
Exactly.
that. So that makes a lot of sense. And one thing that I'm really liking about the idea of setting zero gas fees is that you could create alternative business models that maybe make more sense for different individuals, like a subscription model, or something like that, where funds are pooled in order to cover the final payment to clearing the transaction on Ethereum. At least like that's sort of like how I'm thinking about it a little bit. I'm not super familiar with how rollups work. I'd have to do a lot more research into it. But I had one quick question about how you set it to zero gas fees. Is that like a immutable variable once you deploy the chain, or is it changeable afterwards?
Yeah, great question. It's totally changeable afterwards. So, just like how, even like Optimism, like other layer twos, but also just like layer ones, the gas fee is pretty dynamic. It changes, second to second. Yeah, it's totally changeable. So if you wanted to, let's say, make it so that for the first 6 months of operation, your company subsidizes all the user gas fees to drive user growth, but then you turn on a fee mechanism, like you could totally do that. Or vice versa. So yeah, I mean, it's basically like as dynamic as possible.
That's really cool. I love what you guys are doing because I think a lot of it will it almost sets up like this system where these chains, these rollups can act as like a I don't know, like a smaller state government where you can
Totally.
test things out a little bit faster on smaller scale. There's less risk because it's smaller. Of course, you're not like making a massive change to a protocol that supports whatever hundreds of billions in assets under management or volume or whatever like that. And so I could see this definitely like as people test things out and find out what works, then probably like the those that are most successful and have the most consensus among these rollups, maybe those will get adopted slightly faster on Ethereum, or like you had mentioned, those EIPs that have been open for a long time, they can get tested faster on these rollups and really inform decision making on the mainnet, which is super cool. I don't know. I think this is a great idea. So thanks for sharing about it.
Yeah, of course. And I think you're totally right on that point. You basically hit the nail on the head. Like Ethereum necessarily needs to take a very, very conservative approach to software development. But yeah, that doesn't mean that everyone needs to. And if you want to, mess around and try new designs, whether that's, adding new things to the protocol or new economic designs, like people should have the freedom to do so. And then hopefully, that informs future development. So I think you're totally right on that front.
I absolutely love it. I have one quick question, just for like deployment of. I see it's like EVM compatible. Is there like, can you just deploy through Truffle, through like Hard Hat? Like what's the stack for tooling here? Like, can you connect to the roll up through Remix? Like what how, if I were to try and deploy my own chain and start adding apps on top of it, how would I go about that?
Yeah. So whatever tools you use for Ethereum development will work. So Truffle, Hardhat, Remix, Foundry, yeah, everything will work. And same thing for users, right? Users can connect, just add the chain via MetaMask. It's just like the same process of adding Polygon to your MetaMask or the AVAX C chain. So from a developer and user perspective, it's pretty much the same.
That's awesome. I really love it, and I'll definitely have some more questions once I'm more well read up on the subject. But I really appreciate you fielding the questions that I had, and yeah, look forward to seeing the chains that come up out of Caldera. What should I call it? What should we be calling them? Are they just like app rollup chains? Like do you guys have a official word for them, or?
That is a great question. We in the past we've called them like app rollups, but I think you're right to ask this question, because there are a lot of chains which might not really be application specific; they're more ecosystem specific. So right, and Wabi was talking about Base. Base is a good example, and there might be a lot of other companies that want to do something like Base. Like they might have a wallet, they might have an exchange, they want to launch a chain for their ecosystem. It doesn't really make as much sense for those to be called application-specific chains. So, I mean, the thing that we're kind of calling them right now is dedicated rollups, sort of like an allusion to dedicated servers in Web 2. But I think there is a much cooler name that could exist for them. So we're currently feeling that out.
Awesome. So yeah, dedicated rollups. I mean, that sounds cool. I also want to touch on just like, I feel like this fits the thesis of Derek Edwards. I don't know if you've heard about him, but he's a partner at Collab Currency up in New York, and crypto VC and big like NFT enthusiast. And it was interesting. I remember listening to a podcast, a proof podcast with him on it like last year. He was talking about how blockchains are like scoreboards, and how eventually it won't really matter the blockchain, but what kind of score it's keeping. Therefore, like what that blockchain is known for and what it hosts. And so I like how you emphasize ecosystem instead of just purely app, because an ecosystem can encompass a series of apps that are all composable and work together really well. And so I think of like things like metaverses and game logic once it's applied to contracts and stuff like that, which for true on-chain gaming, which is the desire I think of a lot of people who are really interested in crypto gaming. This type of thing seems like it will accelerate the adoption, the deployment, and pretty much every component of that type of game, that type of ecosystem. So that's really cool. I like it.
Cool. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I'm not familiar with Derek Edwards, but I'll need to take a look at his talk.
Awesome. I have one last question, I guess, before I run out of ideas. But essentially, you'd mentioned there's a lot of like it's kind of focused towards games and some of these other protocols. Do you guys have any interesting games or use cases or case studies you could point us to if we were like, hey, I like this idea, I want to see if it'll work for mine, but I want to see how somebody else is using it first.
Yeah, of course. So we have a couple on our blog.caldera.xyz. 2 case studies for games, both of which are like this sort of like fully on-chain gaming sort of model where like a lot of the game state and a lot of the game logic is stored in smart contracts on chain. We're going to have likely a few more case studies across other verticals coming out soon. The great thing about these fully on-chain games is they work very quickly, and so we're able to get get something published really quickly. We have a lot of interest, and we're working with a lot of different teams across different verticals that are currently in the pipeline. But it might take a little bit to get those over the line and in the state where they're public and ready for us to be writing case studies about. But regardless, like our blog.caldera.xyz, it's a great place to read both about like how we've been working with teams in the past and also just some of the features that we've been building.
Awesome. That's super cool. I'll make sure I take a look at those articles. And one more question actually popped up while you were speaking. I was wondering so if I do, deploy like say like there's you deploy specialized NFT like marketplace and game apps to a specific dedicated rollup. What would it take to like what's the process look like for porting assets off the rollup onto mainnet or to other chains that are connected or EVM compatible or something like that?
Yeah, great question. This is something that we've actually been focused on as we've been working with more games. So currently, our bridge, we added functionality for 721s and 1155s. So if you're launching NFTs, you could imagine, a scenario where you're some NFT platform, you're minting a ton of NFTs for users, games, whatever, and you have a marketplace on that platform, and a lot of the like lower value NFTs, whatever items in a game are all being transacted on that platform. But for like the really high value items where you want to get maximum liquidity, you can bridge them back to the layer 1, like Ethereum or Polygon, list them on OpenSea or Blur or whatever, and get access to liquidity there. And so we currently support that out of the box, that two-way bridging across the rollup bridge.
That's awesome. I love to hear it. And yeah, that all sounds good to me. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
Matt, I want.
So
go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, Bobby. I was just gonna ask Caldera. I'm Tempest. Just heard about you guys. Seems pretty interesting. And my question is, for these games, what type of game can you run on the blockchain currently? Because I know it was something Kingdoms. It was kind of a pixelated game. Is
Kingdoms.
the game itself
DeFi Kingdoms, yeah.
Yeah, DeFi Kingdoms. Yeah, DeFi Kingdoms. It was on chain, but are the games off chain and then you sell the items on chain, or how is it specifically going to work?
Yeah, it's pretty much the full spectrum of what's possible. So we're working with some games where it is more of like that traditional model where the game items are represented as NFTs, but like the game exists off chain, and there's a server and everything else. But we're also we're working with a couple teams that are fully on-chain games. One is called Curio. Another one that we just announced is called Giant Leap, or the company's called Giant Leap. They just released a game called The Underverse. And in those games, there literally is no server. Every action is stored on chain. All the state of the game is stored on chain. When you're like making a move, on the map and your character is walking around, like those are on-chain transactions that are being made. So it really is up to the developer to choose what they want. I mean, given the properties of the chain, a lot of the games that are being built under this like new sort of fully on-chain game paradigm, they might be more kind of, roguelikes or like RPGs, or like tactical RPGs, things that are like at least a little bit more turn-based. Like I think it's going to be a while until we get like, like a fast twitch like FPS game where all the actions and all the player state is stored on chain. But for certain types of games, you can totally do it with our technology today, where the entire state of the game and are on chain, and users, instead of interacting with some other game server, are like directly sending Ethereum transactions to make moves in the game.
I wanted to throw something.
That's
Oh,
really-
go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's really interesting. Thanks for answering that question.
So I want to touch upon security, Matt. So man, I literally just had a brain fart. Son of a nutcracker, man. Just as we always say on our other shows, right? But all right, it's back to me now. But yeah, man. Katz, can you tell me exactly how app rollups inherit the security of some ones while still offering the speed and scaling of a traditional rollup, man? Sorry for the bit of a lag there, man. I've just been like so in tune with the conversation, and I'm learning quite a bit, man. Shout out to Mr. Ethan, man, rolling out some gigabrain stuff, bro. Props to you, man. But
Yeah, I just want to say, Mr. Rife, we appreciate your questions and anyone who comes up here and asks
yeah,
anything of
man.
the sort.
Yep.
It's been good listening, and Tempest as
Thank
well, of course.
And I also posted some things for you guys in the audience up on the Nest. I know we were talking about native on chain with Caldera and all that stuff, so I put that on the Nest, and I also put up a few of the threads that Caldera has done as far as like why they started Caldera, and then also what kind of revenue streams is possible through really the vision of what Caldera seeks out to do on the L2 landscape, and also of course relating to gas fees. I posted that up on the Nest as well, and also as in the beginning of the space, I also put up their stateful pre-compiled. So Katz, I'm gonna leave it all to you, man, for the question, brother. Great stuff from you, man, and I'm really learning a lot, man. So thank you guys, thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah. So the question. Oh wait. Hello. Is this working?
Yeah, you're good, brother. You're good. Loud and clear, man. Loud and clear.
Okay. Great. I'm not getting the little audio thing on my phone. But okay. Glad it's working. So yeah, when it comes to how rollups inherit security from the L1, it depends on the type of rollup, right? There are ZK rollups and there are optimistic rollups. And what we're currently working on, as I mentioned, we're working on the OP stack. So it's currently, we're focused on like an optimistic rollup sort of paradigm. And so like the way that an optimistic rollup works is that, there's some protocol, right? With the EVM, you say, you have like a defined way to process transactions and update the blockchain state. And then you have some way to represent the state. It is called like a state root. It's basically like a hash that represents like the current blockchain state. So, the transaction flow, a user will send a transaction directly to the L2 node. That node will like process that transaction, update its internal database, and then that in turn will update the representation of the state of the blockchain, which is this hash. And that node will periodically post that to the L1. And that's super necessary for security. So now you have these like state hashes being posted to the L1. The rollup node will also post transaction data to the L1. So anyone can verify that the history of all the transaction data that's been posted to, let's say, Ethereum, if you were to run all of that from the start to the end, that is equivalent to this given state, this given commitment of the representation of the blockchain state, which has been posted on the L1. And so in the happy case, the layer 2 node acts honestly. It's posting state correctly, it's processing transactions correctly, it's not acting maliciously, and people can verify that by looking at the layer 1 chain, by looking at Ethereum. And that's the case for Optimism and Arbitrum and pretty much all of the other optimistic rollups, right, that are operated by these teams. And it'll be the case for rollups operated by us. Like, we're not going to try to screw with the state or do something malicious. It would be bad for our reputation, etc. And so there hasn't yet been a need for dispute resolution mechanism. Obviously, in order to actually have security inherited from the L1, you need to have some mechanism for what happens if that L2 node decides to cheat, right? It takes in all of these transactions, but the L2 node says, I'm also going to mint, me, the CEO of Caldera, like I'm going to mint myself 10 million tokens and hope nobody notices. And so if that were to happen, then the root, the state that is posted to the layer 1 chain will not match all the transaction data that's come in. And then in that case, someone needs to submit a dispute. And this is why it's called like optimistic, rollups, because in the happy case, no dispute is needed. Kind of trust the chain until the chain acts maliciously. And then an arbitration process happens on Ethereum on the L1, where someone will come and say, hey, this guy minted a bunch of tokens to himself, like that doesn't line up with all of this previous transaction data. Then I will say, no, I'm acting honestly. And this is obviously abstracting over a lot of complicated technical things, but the layer 1 chain will then arbitrate this dispute process, and one side will end up winning. So if the node was acting dishonestly, then and someone like catches it out, then that malicious transaction or that malicious state update that was done by the node will be like reverted, and the state will once again match only the legitimate transactions on the chain. Hopefully that makes sense. I think it's very difficult to like describe verbally and comprehensively the way that like an optimistic rollup dispute mechanism system works. But there are some really, really great articles that have been written about this. And so the short answer actually is that we use, we're based off the Optimism code base. We have the same security properties of the Optimism code base. And the goal is for proof disputes to be done in the same way that they'd be done on Optimism. So yeah, for those who are like very, very interested in getting in the weeds, I really highly recommend reading the docs on Optimism or Arbitrum. They both have like very similar designs for disputes to learn more, because it is a very interesting process. It's a lot more easy to explain when you have diagrams and a blog post to talk about how things work.
Thank you so much for that interesting response. I want to pass it on over to Will's Outlook. I don't want to blather on during the conversation. So Will's Outlook, welcome to the stage, man. We're here joined by Caldera. If there's anything that you want to bring up, man, feel free to go ahead, bro. How you doing today, brother?
I'm doing good. I'm just kind of looking back. I hear the gaming conversation a lot. I really, really do. And while I would like it to be a little bit more compatible, I feel like there's scalability issues as well as network security issues and many other things. So, I mean, I guess really the question here is like, how are you addressing those scalability issues and network security issues? I can name off a few if you need examples of what I'm talking about specifically.
Yeah, I think I would be interested in what you mean specifically.
So one being, I'd say in 2021 was a great example of Ethereum scalability limitations / issues, right? I think we run into that anytime we run into a bull run or run into a market that's very frothy with crypto. We end up with slow networks, high costs, very, very high costs networks. Even if you're trying to do free gas fees, like it gets to a point of energy consumption and reward consumption that you have to start charging people. Like there's no possibility in some cases once the network is so much in use that you can let people get away with just free gas fees, because it will be high cost to the end or to the actual developer who's trying to offer this feature, right? And again, that's with network adoption. So as networks adopt, they expand, and as they expand, they try to keep up with the expansion and how fast the net, or I would say the ecosystem of crypto moves. Um, Ethereum was a great example of that in 2021. I mean, when you're talking $500 gas fees, you're talking about transactions that would sometimes take days to go through. Um, and I know that ZKs, I know that layer twos are trying to resolve that, but without the adoption, I feel that all these all these networks, or side networks, essentially is what I would call them, right? Or I know they're layer twos built on the back of Ethereum, could end up with security issues is due to the fact that they don't have the same amount of adoption, so they don't have the same amount of security, they don't have the same amount of I don't know how you're providing security, whether that be proof of stake, proof of work, or what your specifics are. Sorry, I should have asked that at the beginning. But if it's stake, then you need really heavy adoption to get, and you need that high TVL. If it's work, then you need to interest people into wanting to run your network or wanting to run your nodes. And if you have a low amount of node, we'll say people that are willing to run your network, um, your end users, your people getting the rewards, then you're basically going to have slow transactions and not be able to keep up with the expansion of the network. Does all that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I think this is a really great question. A lot of the things that you talked about when it comes to scalability are the reasons why we started this company. So you talk about Ethereum, Ethereum is about as fast from an instructions per second standpoint as like a computer from the mid 1970s. And a lot of the issues with Ethereum, come from the fact it's highly distributed, it's highly redundant, it's very, very secure. And that means that transactions are going to be high, because when you're running a single transaction, there are like 20,000 nodes that are going to need to rerun that transaction. And of course, because of that, you have very limited transaction throughput, and then you have an auction mechanism with gas, and then that's what drives prices up. And what you have is all these applications on a single chain like Ethereum, all competing for these extremely scarce resources. And that's in a bull what leads to prices going way up. And so the model that we're suggesting is one where applications each have their own chain, and that means that they're able to de-risk from gas prices spiking because Ethereum, there's a big NFT mint on Ethereum or something like that. And so that both helps these teams de-risk away from gas markets on major L1s, but it also means that the actual total throughput of all of these blockchains is way higher. It's effectively horizontally scaling rather than vertically scaling by trying to create a bigger blockchain. We're just creating more blockchains, which can each process a certain defined throughput. So the total throughput across all of these blockchains is higher, and they're also a little bit less correlated between them. I think when it comes to prices, I think people are used to blockchains being very expensive, as you mentioned, and using a lot of energy. The really nice thing about layer twos is that because of the security assumptions and the dispute process that I described before, you can inherit security from an existing layer one, which means you don't need to use proof of work or proof of stake. You don't need to have as many nodes on the network in order to run them. And so in terms of just the actual input costs for running a network, it's much lower. You can actually run a blockchain on a single server, that is still sequencing transactions and rolling up to some, L1, call it Ethereum. And then the actual cost to process all of those transactions is just the cost to run this server. It's a really beefy server, but a lot of companies have the capacity to run a single very powerful server for their application. You talk about games, most game companies have extremely vast, extremely costly, distributed systems to run all of their games across many different servers. And so, there's some model, those games aren't, I guess if we take a step back, then, a lot of the times, because blockchains have previously, required proof of stake, proof of work, et cetera, we tend to think of them as this completely other category of software that is very expensive to run and requires all these input costs. But we have L2s, we can inherit security from the L1, and that means at the end of the day, running a blockchain node is just kind of running another piece of software, and you can do it on commodity hardware, and it's not really any more or less expensive than what a lot of Web 2 companies are doing with their software and their hardware. And so from that model, we're really excited about the ability for big games, even massive, mass market games with tens of millions or hundreds of millions of players to be able to eventually onboard big parts of their game economies onto blockchains without needing to pay the crazy gas fees that they would otherwise need to pay. Hopefully that answers your question. Happy to like dive, double click on any of the things I mentioned.
Yeah, I think that kind of helps with the fee portion, right? Where we're kind of utilizing that. Security can still be, you're dependent on the layer one to have a secure network too, and if that layer one failed, then everything else on the back of it would fail. But the other scenario I was looking at too is like you said, 100 million players, right, in a game. So we'll say that game company has its own network on Caldera. They're basically running that network. You've got 100 million people transacting at once. What would that look like as far as transactions going through and being able to keep and the network being able to keep up with game movement and those transactions following through at the same time?
Yeah, I think with regards to something like this, it really depends on the underlying virtual machine that's being used. I mean, that being said, this is a very, very like optimistic case. I don't think that you could run, an 100 million active user network on a single blockchain. But just as how like games, will typically shard their game across multiple servers, oftentimes, geographically, region locked servers, you could totally do the same thing with a game that is used on the blockchain. You could have like the game for the blockchain in the Americas and the game for the blockchain in China and Japan and Europe and Africa, and then kind of run these games separately. And that also has really great UX improvements for users because the users are able to access the blockchain node with less latency because they know it's geographically relatively close to them. And then if someone wants to bridge their assets across these chains, you can do it using some interoperability solution. So, for a lot of these games that have like really, really large throughput requirements, there's no reason why they couldn't shard their application across multiple chains as well. We already see a lot of crypto applications going multi-chain. So it'd be basically the same thing.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought up sharding because I don't think many people know about that. But sharding specifically, like it has its pros and its cons, right? I've seen companies where they've sharded based on region. I've seen companies where they've sharded based on how many people are on an existing layer, right? And there can be a lot of issues with that too. And I think there could be, and this is just a thought, and I think it needs to be tested to really be able to kind of prove it. But I think there could be issues with, we'll say, the sharding perception of the blockchain being able to layer with people on in the same location, right? And being able to keep up with those transactions, moving back and forth and moving from one shard to another. Because like let's say you wanted to play with your friend and you're on a different layer, a different shard, but you're both in the same location, then you have to move over to their shard to be able to play with them. And this is a really deep thought, right? And this is why I think like crypto, and it's not just Caldera. Like I think crypto as a whole has a long ways to go to get to that gaming finalization, right? Because when you think of it on a deeper level, from what a programmer would do as far as setting up the game and getting the game running, it just seems like there's a lot there for blockchain, and I think the scalability is really the biggest thing, right? As far as being able to keep up and again, I go back to 2021 because I think that was a great example. There was just so much froth in the market. The transactions, you're talking days at times to go through. If you got 100 million players within we'll say that, or I guess you said that one company could shard off multiple times, which could allow them to have multiple blockchains pay for separate blockchains to be able to kind of all play together as one network. That scalability probably could work as far as on that. So I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud with a lot of this. Yeah, I think those are great responses for the sharding portion. I'm not too optimistic about sharding specifically. I don't think it's a great way to go at gaming, if that makes sense. And we're talking about just in the real world, right? Because sharding exists currently now in regular gaming. I just hope at some point that they can come up with a better resolution than sharding.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Just like even in Web 2 gaming, right? Like players will often be like region locked. There needs to be some transfer process. Sometimes that's expensive to like transfer assets across, to different data centers or whatever. It's definitely an unsolved problem. I think that one of the nice things about giving people the ability to spin up L2 chains is that these problems tend to pattern match a little bit more onto like the Web 2 problems that existing gaming companies have already solved, which means that like a lot of the experts who are working for these companies can hopefully come up with good solutions, whether those are solutions that are happening more at like the network level or even just on like the user interface level to make the experience from like transferring from shard to shard a little bit easier. But I think you're totally right. Tons of unsolved problems in the space, and like it'll take some time to see how things play out.
Ethan, go on ahead, man.
Yeah, I had a question just about sharding and like how how that may apply. Like, I know that there's this like weird problem that's called like the sniper in the metaverse problem, where it's like, hey, realistically, like shooting a bullet over a really long range requires extremely like fast real-time rendering over, that's perfectly synced over many different servers. And I'm just like wondering, okay, so like it makes sense that the sharding problem will solve like the problem of like needing to bridge assets between those things. But I totally understand what Will was saying in regard to like having a game state that was sharded. It would be more of a user experience friction point than economy that's sharded. I was just wondering, like, have you thought much about like sharding based on lobbies for games that are lobby based, or like region for like like a Clash of Clans type game? You're like, oh well, I'm in this region, and so all the the game logic that's happening in those different regions kind of stays there but can be ported. I'm just like trying to think of like what are some of the best examples, and then if you just show like a quick uh, paradigm or like the farthest reaches of a polarized spectrum of like, hey, like these are the best use cases for sharding that we see in the next like 1 to 2 years, and then like here are the worst use cases, and then you know it's impossible to predict these things, but when you think those use cases could be improved by with technology that hasn't come out yet.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I haven't heard of the sniper in the metaverse, but I think it makes a lot of sense as like an open question. I would be surprised if anyone has a really great answer to this. I think even if you were to take Web3 totally out of the equation, like let's say you tried to create some like infinite, simulation, some metaverse with physics, like someone shooting across, two different like chunks which were represented, on different servers, like there would be a fair amount of effort in order to like figure out how you're going to transfer that like bullet across the different servers, maintain, all the physics and do that all in real time. So this is like a very, very interesting problem. I wish, I'm excited to think more about it. In terms of sharding, I think you basically hit the two most natural kind of ways to do it. I think you hit them both on the head. Like one is via region or country, and there are a lot of benefits there. As I mentioned, like it means that user latency to the blockchain is lower, so they can kind of get results from the blockchain fast, and that can be really important, especially for games with some real time or like semi-real time component. And then you also mentioned lobbies, which I think is really, really interesting, because you could totally do that, and then it kind of then begs the question, well, like another thing you could do is like you could launch kind of ephemeral chains. So if you have some game that is best represented as state on the blockchain, and you want people to be confident that like the game state is being updated in a transparent and secure way, and so you're trying to put all of that on the blockchain, what you could do is like spin up a new blockchain for every lobby, run the game on that blockchain, and then spin it down and still like as a roll-up commit the end state of that game to the main chain, and then people can maybe like claim NFTs or experience points or whatever based on that end state of the game on the layer one chain. So
what would the cost look like on something like that for the developer?
Yeah, I mean, the cost would be just like any other like layer two. In some sense, this is like can already be done, right? Like you can already, via our tech, spin up a rollup. You can obviously shut it down. And the rollup is already posting commitments to state on the L1. That's already happening. And then so the cost is actually from the developer's perspective, like figuring out like some protocol to enable users to like take a look at that state root and then prove that they had like this amount of experience points or they earned these items. But that's a pretty solvable problem. right? And you could even modify certain things about the rollup to make that a little bit easier. But the whole point of a rollup is you're committing state to some other blockchain, and people should be, and you have a dispute mechanism so people can trust that state. So then extracting certain parts of that state out, proving certain aspects of the state is actually kind of baked into the protocol already. So it's more about designing an application that really uses this to the fullest than any sort of like major R&D effort, in order that's blocking making this possible.
So a good way to think about it is like, hey, this is like modularizing a state. And so like what is the most like what's the best unit for modularizing it? Like by lobby, by region, by all these other things that I think like I think it's a really cool space to think, and a really cool like these are some really cool problems to solve. I'm super stoked you guys like have a focus on gaming, because I think that's going to be like there's some really novel use cases for it for the blockchain and gaming, and I think it's gaming is going to be like one of the ultimate like tests of blockchain and decentralized computing in general.
Totally agree with that front. I mean, just historically, not blockchains, gaming has always pushed like consumer hardware and software to its limits. It's always been the most kind of computationally and network intensive use case. So yeah, likewise, very, very interested in seeing how blockchain games evolve and seeing how we can best support them.
Well, I think it used to be. Now I think it's more in like 3D drafting and stuff like that. But to each their own. I think Unity and stuff like that, the Unity engine, really intensive, right? But I think the biggest use case of computational power is rendering, and renderings happen in a lot of different softwares. So I think in those aspects, that would be the bigger one that's keeping innovation pushing through like AMD and Intel and all that stuff like that, keeping them pushing out new chips every year, pushing out new GPUs to try and keep up with the rendering processes. It's an interesting conversation. I think a lot of people probably don't understand the purpose of even talking about gaming. They're like, hey, we're adults, nobody plays games, yada yada. I think gaming from a blockchain perspective is more of a way to build revenue versus a go in and play a video game because I like it. A lot of people like the aspect of getting into games and being able to make money from playing video games. We saw that through 2021. Axis Affinity, really killed it with bringing that attention to the space. And I think while a lot of people focus on NFTs from a gaming perspective, I think they have a lot better use case than just gaming. Also, which is, kind of like file storage for like parts and verification of, we'll say goods that are actually authentic. And I think there's just not enough conversation around that portion of NFTs as opposed to gaming specifically. So that's really kind of been something I've been watching for that actually become innovation for the future for NFTs.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting use cases for NFTs in general. So I can definitely agree with that. My personal interest is definitely in gaming. You mentioned Axie. I was super deep into Axie. I ran a little guild there, and definitely bought into a lot of what they were selling. I don't think I'm not very bullish though on play to earn. I think the entire industry is moving to play to own. I think that people who think you can play a game and earn money, I think that's a little bit it's slight misunderstanding of how economics work. At least in the long run, like somebody's got to be paying for other people to be earning, and so I think more distributed economies in games and real world economies is going to be like it's by default how crypto game economies are built. So it's not something that you inherently need blockchain to do, but it's because it's by default, it sets a constraint, and therefore like new creative options and opportunities for those who want to use the blockchain to tokenize assets. And so I think um, that's like the main interesting point when I think about blockchain games and how they're going to differ from regular games. But just from a monetary perspective, you're right. I think that NFTs can sell for more game objects that you can potentially sell on a secondary peer-to-peer marketplace are going to sell for more, and they also act as some type of pseudo equity. So those gamers who decide to buy into the game assets are now, they feel more tied to it than if it was strictly like controlled on a game account. So there's plenty of articles that articulate it more eloquently than I just did, but I think that those are the main things that get me interested and excited about blockchain gaming. And then just seeing how it's going to evolve over the years. We've talked a lot about separation of blockchain from game state. So where the blockchain acts as some like kind of a marketplace or economic layer for tokenizing in-game objects, whereas like the game state runs on centralized servers. Um, and but then you kind of see like a spectrum of games already emerging, which is incredible. Like Dark Forest, for example, which runs entire game state on chain, and essentially like mines new area of the map using zero knowledge proofs. And so I would definitely like I know it's not everyone's cup of tea gaming, and you're right, like a lot of people think it's just for kids, but I am a large proponent of thinking that the future of social media and social experiences in a virtual place is probably going to happen in a 3D realm. And so as somebody who also kind of loves to render things in Blender, and loves games as well, I think you're right. A lot of the computational um, efficiencies are created in industries that cater towards rendering, but I certainly wouldn't count gaming out in any way from reaching the masses of all ages and really pushing the limitations of what our technology can and should be able to do.
Well,
Guys, I
yeah, go ahead.
I wanna thank everyone for coming on, and this is some pretty interesting discussion, but we are running short on time here, man. So I want to thank all our speakers for coming up, everyone who contributed to the conversation, and shout out to Mr. Katz. Thank you, brother. You guys are Chads, man. Want to thank you so much for coming up on here. And if you guys are new to these spaces, my name is Wabi, and I host spaces like these all the time with projects that are going to be releasing onto the crypto market over the next 2 years. I call it the innovation series. So, we just wrapped up with Caldera, and earlier in the week we had Monad, and then a little bit before that we had Eigenlayer. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up on here. We're going to be hosting, believe it's Dimension XYZ. They're up next in the innovation series here at Because Bitcoin. So feel free to follow the Chads over at Caldera. I put some things up on the Nest if you guys want to check that out. And you guys can catch all of our spaces up on our YouTube channel. Every single episode is uploaded onto our YouTube. Um, you know, Pretty much like within the same minute that our spaces conclude, man. So, man, I guess Mr. Katz, my last question to you is: how can people keep up with what you guys are doing at Caldera, and also help out to contribute to everything that you guys are doing, brother?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Wabi, for having us on. This was a total blast, and thanks so much, everyone, for all of your questions. Amazing questions. Yeah, in terms of keeping up with us, this account that I'm on, please follow it. Everything we do, we post about on Twitter, so it's definitely the most kind of consolidated way to stay in touch with development, like case studies, announcements of partners and customers, etc. Also, feel free to follow me on my personal account. It's at 0xkatz, Katz. If anyone wants, I don't know, hot takes on crypto and other things. And yeah, I would also say if anyone is considering launching a chain for your application, or you're even just interested in talking about blockchain design or potentially use cases, or anything that you're building and how we can fit in, please feel free to DM me either on my personal account or on the company account. We read every single DM, and so please reach out if you're interested.
Well, go ahead, man, before we wrap up the space, brother.
So since Wabi missed it, don't forget to follow at Because Bitcoin, the yellow check mark over beside Wabi right now.
That's right. That's right.
Give them a follow, a like, and don't forget that they exist, because that's where all the content comes from.
Exactly. And I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor for Crypto World Radio, Nose Protocol, and they're a non-custodial crypto lending app with sustainable features for borrowers, and also they offer loans that are under collateralized with financing up to 150% without the risk of liquidation through their DeFi lease solution, which will be launching end of Q2. So shout out to Nolus for sponsoring this episode. And also, thank you so much, Will, for joining me up on the panel. Shout out to Ethan. Shout out to Mr. Katz behind the Caldera profile. And also for our audience, every single follow means the world to us. And yeah, looking forward to the developments of all things Caldera XYZ. And looking forward to catching up with them. And hopefully we can get on some other members of their all-star team up on the show in the summertime, hopefully maybe the fall. So looking forward to that. Thank you, Mr. Katz. Hope you enjoyed your time with our community today, man. Hope it was insightful and also entertaining with the dialect and all that stuff, man. So appreciate you, brother. God bless you, your family, and your friends. Have a good rest of your Sunday, man, and wishing you the best for the coming week ahead, man. And hopefully we can run into each other into a conference second half of this year or first half of 24, man. So thank you so much, brother. Peace out, guys.
Yeah.
I forgot to say one more thing. Gosh, sorry about that. I think our next show for today is going to be up on our YouTube at 8 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be myself, Max, Will, Premise, and Snorlax, and also Feel Pain. Look forward to that in our YouTube. We're going to be doing YouTube live streams at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So, Matt, thank you again, man.
Yeah, thanks so much.